The sound of cracking timber was the last thing Rose Campbell heard before the world went dark, and the mountain swallowed her whole. She had been exploring the abandoned silver mine just outside Ogden, Utah, against every warning her father had given her that morning in August of 1878, and now tons of rock and earth separated her from the summer sky. The air tasted of dust and copper, and somewhere above the rubble she could hear her mare whinnying in distress. Rose pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her breathing shallow and rapid. She was 22 years old, and until this moment she had thought herself invincible. Her father owned the general store in town, and she had grown up hearing stories of prospectors who had vanished into these mountains, never to return. She had always dismissed those tales as exaggerations meant to frighten children. Now, trapped in absolute darkness with only the sound of settling rock around her, she understood that some stories were born from terrible truth. She called out, her voice cracking with fear. No response came except the echo of her own desperation bouncing off unseen walls. Her hands fumbled in her riding skirt pocket, finding the small box of matches she always carried. With trembling fingers, she struck one against the rough stone. The tiny flame illuminated a space no larger than a root cellar, with a wall of collapsed timber and rock blocking what had been the mine entrance. The match burned down to her fingertips, and she dropped it with a gasp, plunging back into darkness. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning in the suffocating blackness. Rose tried to conserve her matches, lighting one every so often to check if anything had changed. It never had. She thought about her father, who would be closing the store about now, expecting her home for supper. She thought about her mother, dead these past 5 years, and wondered if she would soon join her. The thought made her throat tight with unshed tears. Meanwhile, at the edge of town, Isaac Harding was just riding in from 3 weeks of driving cattle north. He was 26, with sun-darkened skin and hands calloused from years of ranch work. His horse was tired, and so was he, but there was something about the late afternoon light that made him want to keep riding. He had been thinking about settling down, maybe buying a small spread of his own, but the truth was he had no one to settle down with. The cowboy life was lonely, even when you were surrounded by other men on the trail. He stopped at Campbell's general store to pick up tobacco, and maybe some of those peppermint sticks the old man always kept in a jar by the register. The store was still open, but Thomas Campbell stood at the window, staring out at the darkening street with an expression that made Isaac pause at the threshold. "Mr. Campbell, store closed." Thomas turned, and Isaac saw the worry etched deep in the older man's face. "My daughter," he said, his voice rough. "She rode out this morning to sketch the wildflowers up near the old Brennan mine. She should have been back hours ago." Isaac felt something cold settle in his gut. "The Brennan mine, that's unstable. Everyone knows that. I told her. God knows I told her." Thomas pressed his knuckles against the window frame. "But Rose is headstrong, always has been. She doesn't think the rules apply to her." Isaac had seen Rose Campbell around town, though they had never properly spoken. She was the kind of woman men noticed, not just because she was beautiful, with auburn hair that caught the light like copper wire, but because there was something fierce and alive in her eyes. She walked through town like she owned it, chin up, never simpering or pretending to be less than she was. "How long has she been gone?" Isaac asked. 8 hours, maybe 9. Isaac did not hesitate. "I will go look for her." Thomas turned, surprise and hope warring on his weathered face. "It is getting dark. The mountain is no place to be at night. Then I had better hurry." Isaac was already backing toward the door. "Which way did she ride?" Thomas gave him directions. his hands shaking as he pointed northeast toward the mountains that loomed over Ogden like silent sentinels. Isaac nodded once and ran for his horse. The gelding protested, exhausted from the long drive, but Isaac urged him forward anyway. Some things could not wait for morning. The ride up the mountain trail took longer than he wanted, the fading light making it difficult to see the path. He called out Rose's name every few minutes, listening for a response that never came. Then he saw her mare, still saddled, grazing nervously near a cluster of pine trees. The horse's reins were trailing, and there was no sign of its rider. Isaac dismounted and approached slowly, catching the mare's reins and tying both horses to a sturdy branch. He looked around, his eyes adjusting to the twilight, and then he saw it. The entrance to the old mine had collapsed, fresh dirt and rocks spilling down the hillside. A sketchbook lay open on the ground nearby, its pages fluttering in the evening breeze. "Rose!" He ran to the rubble pile and pressed his ear against it. "Rose Campbell, can you hear me?" For a long moment there was nothing. Then, so faint he almost missed it, a voice. "Help, I am in here." Relief and terror flooded through him in equal measure. "I am going to get you out. Can you tell me if you are hurt?" "I do not think anything is broken." Her voice was stronger now, threaded with desperate hope. "But I cannot move the rocks. I tried." "Do not try anymore. Save your strength." Isaac straightened and looked at the collapsed entrance. The opening had been reinforced with timber supports once, but those had rotted through and given way. Tons of rock now blocked the passage, and he had no tools except his bare hands and the knife at his belt. He began to dig anyway. The rocks were sharp, cutting into his palms as he hauled them away one by one. Some were too large to move alone, and he had to work them back and forth, creating enough space to slide them aside. His shoulders burned with the effort, and sweat ran down his back despite the cooling air. Above him, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. "What is your name?" Rose's voice came through the rocks, and he realized she was trying to stay calm by talking. "Isaac, Isaac Harding. I have seen you in town. You work the cattle drives." "Yes." He grunted as he moved a particularly stubborn boulder. "And you are the girl who does not listen to warnings." He heard her laugh, a sound edged with hysteria. "I suppose I deserve that. My father will say I told you so for the rest of my life, assuming I have a rest of my life." "You will." Isaac's hands were bleeding now. He could feel the warm stickiness on his palms, but he did not stop. "I am not leaving this mountain without you. You do not even know me. Does not matter." And somehow it truly did not. Isaac could not explain the fierce protectiveness that had seized him the moment he heard she was missing. Maybe it was because he had been thinking about purpose, about something worth staying for, and here was a woman who needed him. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe some part of him had already decided that Rose Campbell was worth bleeding for. Hours passed. The moon rose, full and bright, giving him enough light to work by. His hands were raw, the skin torn and bleeding freely now. Every rock he moved felt heavier than the last, and his back screamed in protest. But he kept going. Inside the cave, Rose kept talking, telling him about her life, her dreams of seeing San Francisco, her love of drawing the mountains that had now tried to kill her. "Why do you do this?" she asked as the night deepened. "Risk yourself for someone you do not know." Isaac paused, breathing hard, his hands resting on a rock slick with his own blood. "Because leaving you here is not something I could live with." She was quiet for a moment. "I think you might be the most stubborn man I have ever encountered, Isaac Harding." "Takes one to know one, Rose Campbell." She laughed again, and this time it sounded more real, less afraid. "Fair enough." The work was brutal. By midnight, Isaac's hands looked like raw meat, and every movement sent pain shooting up his arms. He had created a small hole in the debris, but it was not yet large enough for Rose to crawl through. He could see her now, though, a pale face in the darkness, watching him work with eyes that shone with unshed tears. "You need to stop," she said, her voice breaking. "You are hurting yourself, not stopping." He attacked the rocks with renewed fury, ignoring the blood that made his grip slippery. "Almost there. Isaac, please, you have done enough. Go get help from town. By the time I ride down and bring men back up here, it will be morning. You have been trapped for hours already. The air in there cannot be good." He did not say what else he feared, that another shift in the unstable mind could crush her completely, or that she might simply lose hope and give up. "I am getting you out tonight." She watched him work, this stranger who was destroying his hands for her sake, and something shifted in her chest. She had spent her whole life pushing people away, insisting on her independence, refusing to need anyone. But here was a man who had chosen to need her to be safe, who had made her survival his mission without asking for anything in return. "Tell me about yourself," she said, needing to keep him talking, to give him something to hold onto besides pain. "Where are you from?" "Kansas, originally." Isaac wedged his knife under a rock and used it as a lever, ignoring the way it cut into his already damaged palm. "My parents had a farm, but it failed. I came west 5 years ago to find work. Do you like it? The cowboy life? It is honest work." He grunted as the rock finally shifted. "Hard but honest, though I admit it gets lonely. A man can only talk to cattle for so long before he starts to lose his mind." Despite everything, Rose smiled. "I would imagine so. What do you talk to them about?" "The weather, mostly. They are not great conversationalists." The rock came free and he tossed it aside, then reached for another. "Sometimes I tell them about the places I want to see. California, maybe, or Oregon. They never seem impressed. Cattle are notoriously difficult to impress. That is what I have found." Isaac's hands were shaking now from exhaustion and blood loss, but the opening was growing larger. He could almost fit his shoulders through. "What about you? What do you tell yourself when you are out sketching these mountains alone?" "I tell myself that I am free." Her voice softened. "That no one can tell me who to be or what to want, that I can go anywhere and do anything." She paused. "It sounds foolish now, sitting in this hole." "It is not foolish." Isaac looked at her through the gap, meeting her eyes. "Freedom matters, but so does knowing when to accept help. I am learning that lesson rather dramatically." He managed a tired grin, then turned back to the rocks. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn when he finally cleared enough space for her to crawl through. His hands were no longer functioning properly. The pain had moved beyond acute and into a strange numbness that worried him more than the initial agony had. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of exertion and dust. "I think you can make it now. Come toward my voice." Rose had been sitting in that cave for nearly 18 hours, and her body protested as she moved. But the opening was there, blessed and real, and she scrambled toward it on her hands and knees. The space was tight, rough rock scraping her arms and tearing at her blouse, but then Isaac's hands were reaching for her, and she grabbed them without thinking. He cried out in pain, and she nearly let go, but he held on, his grip firm despite the damage. He pulled her through the opening, and then she was out, breathing the sweet mountain air, and they both collapsed onto the ground beside the debris pile. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply lay there, breathing, staring up at the lightening sky. Then Rose turned her head and saw Isaac's hands in the growing dawn light. She gasped, sitting up despite her exhaustion. "Oh God, your hands!" They were barely recognizable as hands anymore, torn and bloody, some of the cuts still seeping. "Isaac, you need a doctor. We need to get you to town right now. In a minute." He did not move, too exhausted to do anything but breathe. Just need to rest a minute." Rose looked at him, at this man who had spent the entire night destroying himself to save her, and something cracked open inside her chest. She had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought it was something novelists invented to sell stories. But this was not love at first sight. This was something deeper and more frightening. This was recognition. This was knowing that her life had just divided into before and after, and everything was different now. "You are the most stubborn, foolish, wonderful man I have ever met," she whispered. Isaac turned his head to look at her, and despite the pain and exhaustion, he smiled. "You keep saying that like it is a bad thing." She laughed, and then she was crying, tears streaming down her face as the terror of the night caught up with her. Isaac reached out with one ruined hand and touched her face, smearing blood on her cheek, and she caught his wrist gently, carefully, holding it like the precious thing it was. "We need to get you to Dr. Morrison," she said, forcing herself to be practical. "Can you ride?" "I think so." But when he tried to sit up, his body would not cooperate. The adrenaline that had kept him going all night was gone, and there was nothing left but pain and bone-deep weariness. Rose got to her feet, swaying slightly, and went to the horses. She untied them and led them over, then looked at Isaac sprawled on the ground and tried to figure out how to get him on his mount. He was tall and broad-shouldered, easily outweighing her by 70 pounds, and he could barely move. "All right, Cowboy," she said, summoning strength she did not know she had. "Work with me here. I am going to help you up." Together, with much struggling and more than a few bitten-off curses, they managed to get Isaac into his saddle. Rose tied his feet in the stirrups, so he would not fall off if he lost consciousness, then mounted her own mare. She took the reins of his gelding and started down the mountain trail, moving as quickly as she dared in the growing light. The ride back to Ogden seemed to take forever. Isaac swayed in his saddle, his eyes closed, his face gray with pain. Rose kept talking to him, forcing him to stay conscious, asking him questions about anything and everything. He answered in mumbles, but he stayed awake, and that was what mattered. The sun was fully up when they reached the edge of town, and people stopped to stare at the sight they made. Rose Campbell, her clothes torn and dirty, her face smudged with tears and blood, leading Isaac Harding, whose hands looked like they had been through a meat grinder. Someone ran ahead to fetch Dr. Morrison, and by the time they reached the physician's office, he was already outside, his face grim as he took in Isaac's condition. "Get him inside," the doctor ordered, and several men rushed forward to help. They carried Isaac into the office and laid him on the examination table. Rose tried to follow, but Dr. Morrison stopped her. "You need looking at too, Miss Campbell, and your father is frantic. Someone should fetch him." "I am fine," Rose said flatly. "Take care of Isaac first." The doctor looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her eyes that made him nod. "All right, but you sit down before you fall down. You are white as a sheet." Rose sat, but she did not take her eyes off Isaac as the doctor began the painful work of cleaning and bandaging his hands. Isaac did not cry out, though she saw him bite his lip hard enough to draw blood. When Dr. Morrison finally finished wrapping the last bandage, Isaac's hands looked like white clubs, useless and enormous. "You are lucky you did not lose any fingers," the doctor said severely. "What possessed you to dig through rock with your bare hands?" Isaac looked past him to where Rose sat, and his eyes said everything his voice could not. The doctor followed his gaze, then nodded slowly. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, you are going to be in considerable pain for a while, Mr. Harding. Those cuts will need to be cleaned and rebandaged daily. Some of them may scar badly, and you will not be working for at least a month, maybe longer." "I will heal," Isaac said, his voice rough but steady. Thomas Campbell burst through the door at that moment, his face wild with relief and terror. "Rose, thank God!" He rushed to his daughter and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "When you did not come home, I thought I had lost you. I thought I had lost you like I lost your mother." "I am all right, Papa," Rose said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I am all right because of him." She pulled back and gestured to Isaac. "He dug me out. All night he dug through the rocks until his hands bled and he got me out." Thomas turned to Isaac, his eyes wet with tears. "I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Isaac said. "I am just glad she is safe." But Thomas shook his head. "There is a debt here that I cannot repay. You saved my daughter's life at terrible cost to yourself. If there is anything I can do, anything at all, you need only ask." Isaac looked at Rose, who was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "There is one thing," he said slowly, "but I should probably not ask it right now when everyone is tired and overwrought." "What?" Thomas asked. Isaac hesitated, then decided he was too exhausted to be anything but honest. "Permission to court your daughter, if she is willing, that is." The office went very quiet. Rose stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise. Thomas looked between them, clearly trying to process this unexpected request. Dr. Morrison busied himself with putting away his medical supplies, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You want to court me?" Rose asked, her voice faint. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Isaac said. "I know you are brave and strong-willed and probably going to drive me to distraction. I know you love these mountains enough to risk your life exploring them. I know you kept talking to me all night to help me stay focused, even though you were the one in danger. And I know that when I think about the future now, I see you in it." He paused. "But if you do not feel the same, I will understand. You do not owe me anything just because I helped you." Rose stood up, her legs shaky, and crossed to the examination table. She looked down at Isaac, at his bandaged hands and exhausted face, at the man who had literally bled for her, and she knew her answer. "I would be honored to have you court me, Isaac Harding," she said softly. "But you should know that I am difficult and stubborn, and I will probably never stop wanting to explore places I should not go." "Good," Isaac said, and despite everything, he grinned. "I like difficult and stubborn." Thomas cleared his throat. "Well, this is not how I expected this morning to go. But I cannot object to a man who would do what you did for Rose. You have my blessing, Mr. Harding, though I reserve the right to shoot you if you break her heart." "That seems fair," Isaac agreed. Dr. Morrison finally spoke up. "As touching as this is, I need both of you to rest. Miss Campbell, go home with your father and sleep. Mr. Harding, you are staying here for the day so I can monitor those hands. No arguments from either of you." Rose wanted to protest, wanted to stay with Isaac, but her body was making its own decisions. She swayed on her feet and Thomas caught her arm. "Come on, daughter, you need rest." She let him lead her toward the door, but she looked back at Isaac one more time. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for what she felt. "For everything." "You are welcome," Isaac said. "Now go sleep. I will still be here when you wake up." The next few weeks passed in a strange, suspended way. Isaac stayed in a room at the boarding house, his hands healing slowly but steadily under Dr. Morrison's care. He could not work, could barely feed himself at first, and it galled him to be so helpless. But Rose came to visit him every day, and those visits became the center of his world. She brought him meals from her father's store, read to him from the newspaper when his hands hurt too much to hold it himself, and talked to him about everything and nothing. They learned each other in those quiet hours, shared stories and dreams and fears. Isaac told her about growing up poor in Kansas, about watching his parents struggle and fail, about the determination that had driven him west. Rose told him about losing her mother to fever, about the loneliness that had made her seek out empty places, about the art she created as a way of making sense of a world that often made no sense at all. "I have never shown anyone my sketchbooks," she admitted one afternoon, sitting beside his bed as late summer rain drummed against the window. "Except you, I suppose, though you only saw the one I dropped." "Why not?" Isaac asked. His hands were unwrapped today, the wounds healing into angry red scars that the doctor said would fade with time. "Because they are private. They are pieces of me, and showing them feels like showing my soul." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "People might not understand. They might think they are foolish or badly done or not worth the time I spend on them." "I would like to see them," Isaac said quietly, "if you would be willing to share them with me." She looked up at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded. "All right, I will bring them tomorrow." And she did. She arrived at the boarding house with a leather satchel full of sketchbooks, years' worth of drawings and watercolors. They spread them across the bed, and Isaac looked through them with wondering eyes. She had captured the mountains in every season, every mood. There were drawings of Ogden streets, of the faces she saw in the store, of her father laughing at some joke. There were imaginary places too, cities she had never seen, oceans she had only read about. "These are beautiful," Isaac said, his scarred hands gentle on the pages. "Rose, these are really beautiful. You have a gift." She felt tears prick at her eyes. "You truly think so? I know so." He looked at her, his expression serious. "Promise me something. Promise me you will never stop creating these. The world needs beauty and you make beauty. That matters." It was perhaps the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, and it had nothing to do with her face or her figure or any of the things men usually noticed. It was about her work, her passion, the thing that made her who she was. In that moment, Rose knew with absolute certainty that she was falling in love with Isaac Harding. The courtship that followed was both traditional and entirely their own. Isaac could not take her dancing or buy her expensive gifts, not with his hands still healing and his savings depleted from the month of not working. Instead, they went on long walks through Ogden and up into the foothills, though they stayed far away from the mines. They had picnics beside the river, with food Rose packed and Isaac praised. They sat on her father's porch in the evenings, talking until the stars came out, with Thomas occasionally peering out the window to make sure everything was proper. Isaac's hands healed slowly, the scars thick and pink across his palms. Dr. Morrison said he might never have full dexterity back, that the damage had been extensive. But Isaac was patient, working through the stiffness, relearning how to grip a rope or hold reins. By late September, he was able to return to work, though the ranch foreman took one look at his hands and refused to put him on a cattle drive. "You are not ready for that kind of work yet," the foreman said, not unkindly. "But I can use you here, helping with the horses and doing light work around the ranch." It was not what Isaac wanted, but it was honest work and it paid, so he took it. The reduced wages meant he was saving more slowly toward his dream of his own land, but somehow that dream had shifted. Now, when he imagined the future, he saw a small ranch with Rose beside him, her sketchbook spread across a kitchen table, children running in the yard. He had not told her he loved her yet. It seemed too soon, too presumptuous. But the words burned in his chest every time he saw her, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they spilled out. The moment came on a crisp October evening. They had ridden out to a meadow above town, watching the sun set over the mountains. The aspens were golden, and the air smelled of pine and approaching winter. Rose had brought her sketchbook and was trying to capture the light while Isaac sat beside her, content to watch her work. "I love you," he said, the words simple and unadorned. Rose's pencil stilled. She looked at him, her eyes wide and very green in the fading light. "What? I love you," Isaac repeated, more firmly this time. "I know we have not been courting long, and maybe it is too soon to say it, but it is true. I love you, Rose Campbell. I think I started loving you that night in the cave, when you kept talking to me even though you were terrified, and I have not stopped since." She set down her sketchbook with trembling hands. "Isaac, I have spent my whole life convinced I did not need anyone, that needing someone was weakness. But then you bled for me. You destroyed your hands to save me, and you never asked for anything in return. How could I not love you after that? So you do?" His voice was tentative, hopeful. "Love me?" "Yes," she said, and it felt like the most important word she had ever spoken. "Yes, I love you." He kissed her then, gently because they were in public even if there was no one around to see. It was Rose's first kiss, and it was everything she had hoped for, and nothing like she had imagined. It was warm and sweet and tasted faintly of the peppermint stick Isaac had been eating. When they pulled apart, they were both grinning like fools. "I want to marry you," Isaac said. "I know I should probably wait longer to ask, do things properly, but I cannot help it. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build something with you, a home, a future. Will you marry me, Rose?" She looked at him, at this man who had become her whole world in the space of a few months, and she knew her answer. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in December, in a small ceremony at the church in Ogden with half the town in attendance. Rose wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slighter frame, and carried a bouquet of pine boughs since there were no flowers in winter. Isaac wore his best suit, his scarred hands shaking slightly as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. Thomas Campbell walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming down his face, and when the minister asked who gave this woman to be married, his voice cracked as he said, "I do." Isaac and Rose exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance burst into tears. The reception was held in the town hall, with food contributed by neighbors and music provided by a fiddler who had played at every wedding in Ogden for the past 20 years. Isaac and Rose danced their first dance as husband and wife, his scarred hands holding her carefully, her eyes never leaving his face. "Are you happy?" Isaac whispered as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Rose answered honestly. "You?" "I feel like the luckiest man alive." They had pooled their resources to buy a small piece of land just outside town, 40 acres with a creek running through it, and a view of the mountains that made Rose's heart sing. There was no house yet, just a plot of land and a dream, but they did not care. They spent their wedding night in a room at the boarding house, and if it was not fancy, it was theirs, and that made it perfect. The months that followed were full of hard work and harder learning. They lived with Thomas above the general store while Isaac and Rose worked on building their house. Isaac did most of the physical labor, but Rose was there beside him, measuring and planning, even learning to hammer nails with determination if not skill. The house rose slowly through the winter and into spring, a modest 2-room structure with a porch that faced the mountains. They moved in on a warm day in May of 1879, carrying their few possessions across the threshold of their new home. That night, they lay in their own bed for the first time, listening to the creek gurgle outside and the coyotes singing in the hills. "I cannot believe this is ours," Rose whispered in the darkness. "All of this, it feels like a dream." "It is real," Isaac said, pulling her closer. "We built it together. This is just the beginning, Rose. We have our whole lives ahead of us." And they did. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Isaac proved to have a gift for training horses despite his scarred hands, and people began bringing him their difficult animals to work with. Rose tended a large garden and sold her vegetables in town, and in her spare time, she painted. She had set up a small studio in one corner of their house, and the walls were slowly filling with her artwork. Their first child came in the spring of 1880, a boy they named James Thomas Harding. He had Isaac's dark hair and Rose's green eyes, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. Isaac held his son with his scarred hands and wept, overwhelmed by the perfection of the tiny life they had created. Rose recovered slowly from the birth, and there were nights when she was afraid, when the memory of being trapped in that cave came back and she woke gasping. But Isaac was always there, holding her, reminding her that she was safe, that she was home. "I have you," he would murmur into her hair. "You have me. We have each other, and nothing can change that." James was followed by a daughter, Margaret Rose, in 1882, and then another son, Samuel Isaac, in 1884. The house grew to accommodate them, new rooms added as the family expanded. The ranch prospered, and Isaac's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout Utah Territory. Rose's paintings began to sell, not for much, but enough that she felt she was contributing to the family finances in her own way. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac gave Rose a gift that made her cry. It was a proper studio, a small building he had constructed behind the house, with large windows that let in the northern light and shelves for her paints and canvases. "You have given me so much," he said as she stood in the doorway, speechless. "You gave me a home, a family, a reason to put down roots. This is small compared to all that, but I wanted you to have a space that was just yours, a place where you can create." Rose threw her arms around him, heedless of the children watching from the main house. "I love you," she said fiercely. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "I know," Isaac said, holding her close. "I feel the same way." The years passed as years do. The children grew, learning to ride and rope and help with the ranch work. James turned out to have his father's way with horses, while Margaret inherited her mother's artistic talent. Samuel was quieter than his siblings, more bookish, and Rose and Isaac encouraged his love of reading, buying him books whenever they could afford them. They faced hardships, as all families do. There were droughts that made the creek run low, winters when the snow piled so high they were trapped in the house for days, illnesses that terrified them until the fever broke. But they faced everything together, Isaac and Rose, and their love only deepened with time. On summer evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the mountains turn purple in the fading light, and Rose would think about the girl she had been, trapped in that cave, certain she was going to die. She would look at Isaac, his hair going gray now, his scarred hands still strong and capable, and she would think about how a single night had changed everything. "You ever regret it?" she asked one evening when the children were grown and starting families of their own. "Your hands. What you did to them." Isaac looked down at his palms, at the thick scars that had faded to white over the decades. "Not for 1 second," he said firmly. "These hands built our house. They held our children. They have touched you every day for 30 years. They brought me everything that matters. How could I regret them?" Rose took his hands in hers, tracing the familiar lines of the scars. "I think they are beautiful," she said. "They tell the story of us." In 1908, Isaac and Rose celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. James had taken over much of the ranch work. Margaret was a successful artist in Salt Lake City, and Samuel was teaching at the school in Ogden. There were 7 grandchildren now, running wild through the house and yard, filling the air with laughter. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Isaac and Rose walked up to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. They moved more slowly now, their bodies bearing the marks of hard-lived lives, but they still held hands, fingers intertwined. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Isaac asked, looking out at the mountains, black shapes against the star-filled sky. "Of course," Rose said. "You told me you loved me. You asked me to marry you. I said yes to everything. Best decision I ever made asking you." "Best decision you ever made, saying yes." Rose leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth, and thought about all the years they had shared. They had built a life together from nothing but determination and love. They had raised children and weathered storms and grown old together. And it had all started with one terrible night and one man who refused to give up. "If I could go back," she said softly, "and tell that frightened girl in the cave what was coming, what her life would become, I do not think she would believe me." She was so convinced she had to be alone, had to do everything herself. She did not know that love could make you stronger instead of weaker. "She learned, though," Isaac said. "We both learned. We taught each other." They stood there for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, holding each other in the darkness. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of ways, who had built something beautiful and lasting from a single act of desperate courage. As they walked back down the mountain to their home, Rose thought about the sketches she still made of Isaac's hands. She had drawn them hundreds of times over the years, fascinated by the way the scars caught the light, by the strength that remained despite the damage. Those hands had saved her life. They had built her dreams. They had touched her with such tenderness that even now, after 30 years, his touch could make her heart race. The years continued to roll by. They moved more slowly, worked less, spent more time sitting on their porch watching the world go by. Their children took care of them now, the roles reversed, and there was something sweet in that reversal. Isaac's hair went completely white, and Rose's auburn had faded to silver. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, forever frozen in that moment when their lives had collided. In the spring of 1915, Isaac fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came and did what he could, but they both knew how these things went for men of 73. Rose sat by his bedside, holding his scarred hands, refusing to leave even when their children begged her to rest. "I am not going anywhere," she told them firmly. "He stayed with me through my darkest night. I am staying with him through his." Isaac drifted in and out of consciousness, but in his lucid moments he would squeeze her hand and smile. "Still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he whispered hoarsely. "Still my Rose." "Still your Rose," she agreed, tears streaming down her face. "Always your Rose." But Isaac Harding was tough, carved from the same stubborn determination that had made him dig through a mountain with his bare hands. He fought the pneumonia and won, though it left him weaker than before. By summer, he was up and moving around again, though he tired easily and needed frequent rests. "You are not allowed to leave me yet," Rose told him, only half joking. "We have been together too long. I would not know how to be without you." "Good thing I am stubborn then," Isaac said, pulling her down for a kiss. They were granted more time, precious years, when they watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. They attended weddings and christenings, watched the world change around them with automobiles and electricity and all manner of modern wonders. But some things never changed. The mountains still stood sentinel over Ogden. The creek still ran through their property. And they still loved each other with the same fierce devotion that had been forged in darkness and pain all those years ago. On a summer evening in 1920, when Isaac was 78 and Rose was 74, They sat on their porch as they had done 10,000 times before. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Rose had her sketchbook out, trying to capture the light one more time while Isaac dozed in his chair beside her. "I hope there is more," Rose said softly, not sure if Isaac was awake to hear her. "After this, I hope we get to keep going together somehow." Isaac's eyes opened and he reached for her hand. "If there is anything after this," he said, his voice quiet but certain, "I will find you, just like I found you before. I would dig through mountains for you, Rose Campbell Harding. In this life or any other." She set down her sketchbook and moved to sit on the arm of his chair, leaning her head against his. "And I would wait for you," she said. "In the darkness, I would wait, knowing you were coming." They sat like that, as the sun sank below the mountains. Two old people who had loved each other well and truly for more than 40 years. The house behind them was full of life, their children and grandchildren visiting for the summer. But in this moment, it was just the two of them, the way it had always been. Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, in the bed they had shared for 4 decades. Rose held his hand as he slipped away, whispering words of love and gratitude. She did not cry at first, too stunned by the absence of him, by the sudden wrongness of a world without Isaac Harding in it. But she had her children and they had theirs, and the ranch continued. Rose lived for another 7 years, painting until her hands grew too unsteady to hold a brush. She told stories about their courtship to anyone who would listen, about the cowboy who had bled for her, who had refused to give up even when it would have been sensible to do so. "That is what real love is," she would say to her grandchildren. "It is not pretty words or grand gestures, though those are nice. It is choosing someone and keeping that choice day after day, year after year. It is being willing to bleed for them and knowing they would do the same for you." When Rose Campbell Harding died in 1930, at the age of 84, they buried her beside Isaac on a hill overlooking their ranch. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and more than one of them told stories about the night in 1878 when everything had changed. The story became part of family legend, passed down through generations. The cave in that trapped Rose. The cowboy who dug until his hands bled. The love that grew from that desperate night into something that sustained them through all the years that followed. It became the standard against which all other love stories in the family were measured, a reminder that the best things in life are often born from the hardest moments. The house still stands, though it has been modernized over the years. The creek still runs through the property, and the mountains still loom over Ogden, unchanging and eternal. And if you look carefully at the family portraits that line the walls, you can see Isaac's scarred hands in every photograph, a permanent reminder of what he was willing to sacrifice for love. Some love stories are quiet and gentle, unfolding over years of peaceful companionship. But others are born in fire and blood and desperate determination. Isaac and Rose's love was the latter kind, forged in a single night when one person refused to accept defeat, and another learned that needing someone was not weakness but strength. They had their happily ever after, not because their lives were perfect or easy, but because they chose each other every single day. They built something beautiful from nothing but love and stubbornness, and the unwavering belief that some things are worth bleeding for. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.